This week, Trey Ford joins us to talk about platform security, as well as PaaS and hosting. Next up, Jarrett Roderick discusses how you can jumpstart your SOC analyst career. In the enterprise security news, funding announcements from Security Scorecard, Secure Frame Access Security, Orca, Silera, Vulcan Cyber. A non-funding announcement from Thinkst, Fortinet acquires ShieldX, VMware acquires Mesh 7. Wow, say that 10 times fast. Capado acquires New Context. KnowBe4 is filing for IPO. Exabeam launches the first ever, according to them, comprehensive use case coverage. Linksys and Fortinet form an interesting partnership. Sonatype targets more secure software supply chains with a 5-part announcement. CTO.ai launches serverless Kubernetes platform, and more. Stay tuned for that and even more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. As your attack surface stretches from the data center to the cloud and the device edge, security teams need visibility across it all to confidently detect and respond to threats. Experience frictionless hybrid security that helps you stop breaches 84% faster with ExtraHop's Reveal X360, the first and only SaaS-delivered network detection and response. Explore the interactive demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. JumpCloud offers a cloud directory platform that gives users a single identity for their email, apps, network, and work device. Whether Mac, Windows, or Linux, JumpCloud gives IT admins a single pane of glass to configure and secure those devices. With JumpCloud, remote onboarding and offboarding goes from hours to under 5 minutes and puts zero trust security within reach for organizations of any size. Looking for a directory that supports heterogeneous OSs, or you need just SSO, MDM, LDAP, or MFA? JumpCloud will make your job easier. Try it out for yourself at securityweekly.com/JumpCloud. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. It's episode number 221 for March 24th, 2021. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined remotely by Mr. Tyler Shields is here with us.
Good morning, good afternoon, good day.
And you've got like a dad joke on your whiteboard.
Yeah, I've decided to go from advertising, which I had been putting up there, to labeling in some dad jokes. So yeah, French fries aren't from France, they're from Greece.
I love it. Adrian Sanabria is here with us remotely. Adrian, welcome.
Hey, excited to talk about news today. Is going to be amazing. You know, numbers don't have any meaning. You know, dollar signs. Really excited to have Trey on here, though.
I am too. Before we get to that, our next live webcast will be held on April 29th, 11 p.m. I always say 11 p.m. 11 a.m. Eastern Time is when we do our webinars. And it will prepare you to learn how to prepare for modern ransomware, if that makes any sense. You're going to prepare for modern ransomware attacks. Brace yourselves. That'll be with Jake Williams, Adrian, and myself, securityweekly.com/webcasts. Get updated on ransomware, and our archive is available at securityweekly.com/on-demand, where you can access the archive. Joining us today is Trey Ford, VP of Platform Strategy and Trust at Salesforce, here to talk about platform security. The last time I saw Trey, I walked past him at RSA, and I was like, hey, Trey, and he had no idea who I was because I was incognito with glasses and a goatee and a hat. Trey, welcome.
Howdy. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you, Trey. Thank you for joining us today. Now, what's interesting, I look for excuses to talk to my friends, right? That's really, if you haven't clued in on this from the Security Weekly Network, I bring them on as hosts, I bring them on as guests, and it's a very interesting excuse, not that we need an excuse to bring Trey on the show, but I was registering someone for a vaccine, and I don't know if anyone has done this, right? But the security aside, the vaccine websites get really overwhelmed because they'll open up a certain number at a certain time. Everyone will hit the website all at once. And look, if you think you can build a site that's going to handle that situation, you think it's easy, you're crazy, because this is hard stuff. So I was getting all these errors from the different services and the application itself. And one of the errors was from Heroku. I'm like, hey, wait, I know someone that knows a lot about that platform, and I'm like, this is an interesting discussion. Like, how do I secure my applications when they're on these other platforms? And all these questions started flooding my brain. So, Trey, if you could start out maybe with a little bit about your background, how you came to Heroku, then Salesforce, and like a brief overview of the platform for those that aren't familiar with it.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me again. So my name is Trey Ford. I work for Salesforce. I've been there, almost 5 years now. I can't believe it's been that long. I joined Heroku as the head of trust. So I oversaw the SRE organization as well as security. And when I started, we had just the common runtime infrastructure. So Heroku was at the time a massively multi-tenant platform as a service. So I guess super broad review for public cloud infrastructure. You've got SaaS, things like Salesforce, Gmail, applications delivered. SaaS, platform as a service, SPI. SaaS, platform, PaaS in the middle, and then infrastructure as a service below, which is your AWS, your Azure, your GCP. So in the middle, platform as a service is effectively an opinionated way of taking people's code and applications and running them. So from a security standpoint, think of this as RCE, remote code execution as a service. We are effectively running anybody's code. So you don't need to port scan us. You don't have to worry about getting code execution. We just give it to you. So from a security standpoint, when you start looking at things like Heroku, from a security standpoint, we're thinking about this from two principal perspectives. One is maintaining positive tenancy isolation boundaries, keeping your code to yourself in our multi-tenant world. And then, of course, we've got our single tenant world, which is enterprise security oriented, but also maintaining positive control of our control planes. So from a CSA, Cloud Security Alliance perspective, our meta structure is just for Heroku employees, for Salesforce employees managing that infrastructure. So background and how I got here, I'm a security specialist, but from any specific discipline, I'm more of a generalist. I've worked and built response organizations. I tried my hand at conference management, not something I recommend to anyone I love. Special events is its own thing. I've done product management, sales engineering, hands-on consulting and auditing, some pen testing. I was a tool jockey. I don't write my own exploits. My background's in systems and networking. So at Heroku, we are effectively the fastest way. We like to think of ourselves as the fastest way to go from idea to URL. So your developers shouldn't be thinking about how to patch operating systems or how to manage firewalls. They need to be writing code, writing unit tests, preparing to Paul, your point, building code and applications that surprisingly delight customers and scale beautifully. And that's more than enough work for any one individual or team.
Yeah. Trey, so when you say platform as a service, I can run my containers or Kubernetes in Heroku, but can I do functions as well? Like, would you just run my Python code? Like, do you do both or one or the other?
Totally fair. So we were a little bit early on the container concept. So our common runtime stuff is actually LXC. So we're using Linux containers. So we'll take your code, bundle it up, and deploy it. We will, of course, support your Docker containers. Kubernetes is a lot bigger infrastructure problem to solve, and we don't want developers thinking about that. Our opinionated approach is let us run your code. You worry about the code.
Gotcha.
Then from a function standpoint, we're working on some stuff that we're bringing to market called Salesforce Functions. The real magic and unfair advantage that Heroku has is we are a Salesforce property. So we're working towards integrating the Heroku capabilities into the context of Salesforce. So having an awareness of which Salesforce cloud, which organization, which context we need to be operating your code within. We're moving towards that functional capability now.
How much control does the user have over the security bells and whistles, I'll call them, right? Because we all know, listening and sitting here, there's a lot of tuning you can do that impacts security in either a positive or negative way. Like, what are some examples of some features you provide, Trey, to give people control over that?
Wow, that is such a huge question. So the Cloud Security Alliance drives this notion of a shared responsibility model. And so when you start thinking about how to operationalize the deployment and production management and the security program around a PaaS deployed application, you need real clean alignment on that. So we like to use the Cloud Security Alliance CAKE, their consensus questionnaire that maps their control matrix out to all these different regulations, whether it's PCI or NIST or any of these others. And the idea is that you can nail down, kind of a racy format, responsible, accountable, who owns which pieces and who's going to be informed of those things. So the developers, we have a couple notions of role. And again, very, very opinionated, trying to streamline and make this simple. Everyone wants more. The idea is to narrow focus. Again, you want developers working on the applications. So the administrator is going to have the ability to select what type of service. So in the database world, you're looking at what types of database pairing, following, how many backups, that kind of stuff. The developers, of course, can control the pipeline. Enterprises are going to want to run their own CI/CD type of pipeline management and security testing and all that stuff. But when we start getting down towards patching, that kind of stuff, what's below the waterline, so to speak, the things that Heroku's taking care of for our customers, you need visibility into understanding what decisions are made. So they've got stack images that they can select, or if you're building a corporate image into a container and you want us to run a Docker container, that gives you a little bit more control. But that's a really broad space, Paul. And so we've built a lot of documentation around trying to describe where our responsibilities hand off to the customer, and it's up to the customer to implement how they want to do that. But we take a lot of the AWS level stuff off the table for you.
Yeah. So do I choose like my database version of my SQL, or I have the option, it sounds like, to either like let you handle it or have control over it.
Yeah, so you do have some of that. So Heroku Postgres, I guess stepping back, Heroku is a platform where going to run your code. There's a whole bunch of things in our add-on ecosystem that, if you want to use Heroku's Postgres, if you want to use MySQL, if you want to use Heroku's version of Redis or from Redis Labs, however you want to integrate these things, you do have some notional selection there. For our enterprise offerings, we do give you the ability to allow and deny list specifically what your developers are going to have access to.
Gotcha.
So that does narrow that a little bit. Again, we're looking to try to take as much overhead and cognitive load off of the developers as possible to make things easy, make things fast.
Yeah, that's certainly from a developer perspective appreciated, right? Because I find so many cycles can be lost troubleshooting the platform. I mean, just last week, we lost, I don't know how many hours in development collectively because we're troubleshooting the platform, right? Corrupt file system was just, a nightmare. Maybe we need to run on Heroku, actually. You've convinced me already to start.
Look, there's so much to do. And the question is, how much control do you need? To sound academic, there's a Pareto frontier. There's an 80% breakpoint where you don't need to make 80% of the choices. Like you're selecting what your language is going to be, your architecture, all these different things you're going to build out. There's a handful of times that you need additional control or additional special edge cases. But my argument is for 80% of the applications, take some of the variables off the table. Just make it simple.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, do you have templates? Like my example, the thing that keeps me up at night is as a developer, I am writing some code, I'm putting it on a platform, and maybe I've had some input into that platform. Like I want to run a secure container. I want it to not be root, and I want it to not run with privileges. But like site reliability engineers or ops people have the ability to change those things. And as the developer or security architect, I'm like, well, wait, who controls these controls that when we were in development, everything was secure, but now it's moved into production and people can change these aspects. Do you have like a management, like a templating kind of thing?
I think there's a lot less available than you'd think. Again, at the very start, when I mentioned that positive control of our infrastructure and our control planes, and of course, tenancy isolation are our two principal missions for our platform security organization. We're not going to allow you to do anything that's a threat to the hosting platform underneath. So how you configure the application to run inside the container is your business. You're not going to get out of there. You're like that. That's the purpose. We've got this in our bounty programs.
Yeah. So let
us know.
You tightly control. Yeah. Because a lot of those heinous container vulnerabilities I mentioned really speak to the integrity of your entire platform. Yeah.
Correct. And so container escapes are something we're aggressively instrumented for through a variety of means. I don't know that a whole lot of that's under NDA. We've had a number of our speakers at Black Hat talking about how we think about that, but that's something we're instrumented for. That's our business, is running hostile code in our environment, building hostile code in our environment. We're one of the oldest and most battle-tested platforms out there doing this.
That's really awesome. Tyler, Adrian, questions for Trey?
Yeah, I love the tagline from idea to URL, quickest idea to URL, because my introduction to Heroku was literally somebody doing that in a matter of hours. And I had no idea what Heroku was, and he had an idea. And a couple hours later, he was like, messaged me and said, "Oh yeah, so here's my idea." I was like,
"Yeah,
what?
It's funny you bring it up that way, Adrian, because I had the exact same experience. I was developing something. I was like, oh yeah, let's just throw it up in AWS. We'll set these things up, start running through this, build a container, get all that set up." And the particular person was like, "Why aren't you just using Heroku?" So it was this similar kind of like, oh, moment, right? And maybe this question is out of bounds for Trey, so please feel free to throw it out if it is. But is there any significant deltas in the demarcation point of ownership of security between like how AWS approaches it and how Heroku approaches it? Have you thought about that, or is it similar kind of concepts?
I like the way you're thinking about that in terms of demarcation, and like most important in a demarcation is clarity on where that breakpoint is. And old world data centers or on site, when you go into the cross connect closet, where the telco hands off to you. And I think that's the hardest problem in public cloud infrastructure, is achieving this notion of shared responsibility. Where do I hand off to you? This is the modern web concept, the Web 3.0 concept of API contracts. Where do I stop being responsible? You're going to run into this in production engineering and site reliability organizations. Where does the developer and their total ownership model hand off to the production engineering team? So similar construct. I think that the Cloud Security Alliance probably has the best description and construct for that for IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. We've put together a document that's been published. We're using the Cloud Security Alliance CAKE, that consensus questionnaire. Again, total sidebar, non sequitur. I love how everyone has their own custom questionnaires, though it's going to protect them from things like SolarWinds. So using a standardized questionnaire that we can all agree on that maps to most regulatory standards, I think is a very positive thing. And more than answering the question is owning who owns which part of the responsibility, what decisions are being made on my behalf, and how do I validate against that? And we've taken the step to make sure that our SOC and our ISO audits involve and engage that to confirm that we're executing on those duties.
So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit on you and ask a question about adoption of Heroku. It actually doubles back to what some of the stuff that Paul was saying about can I just run my small little section of code in your system? Are you seeing a shift in adoption that's taking us from monolithic, large, single container, large apps that have just everything in the kitchen sink jammed into a single container? I presume you're seeing a rapid atomization of the app into multiple containers and a breakout of the structure of what an application consists of. I think that's a given. But where I tend to live 5 years in the future, and my belief is that we're going to see more API-centric mesh models. Is that something that you're seeing? And if so, how is Heroku positioned to deliver on that?
Wow, so many questions, Tyler, and I thank you for all of those.
I don't mean to give you hard ones, my man.
No, it's great.
Questions I'm working on. So
the joke I would bury is that didn't PCI teach us to make sure that every server or instance was kind of its own duty, but that's just lost in this forum.
I'm glad Jeff isn't here.
Yeah, right.
Fair enough. So to answer your question, I think a lot of folks, as we look at digital transformation, all the marketry that we hear. Folks are moving out of data centers. And so there's a lot of monolithic apps that are moving. And so there's a right and a wrong way to do that. I think AWS has done a good job giving frameworks, like the well-architected framework, to think about moving towards public cloud architecture. Moving your app to the cloud is not going to solve your problems. It's going to make them worse. It's going to make them faster, and accountability is going to be a lot more swift. So to your point, yeah, I think monoliths are being torn apart. I think that atomic services are ideal. I think we're seeing a lot of folks moving to more API mesh type of relationships. We have some of our more legacy code at Heroku even that we're wanting to move towards a multi-master, multi-region, segmented type of API architecture. You're going to have single points of failure that emerge. And so, yes, that's the pattern that we're seeing the enterprises moving towards. I think that's the logical and correct direction. And I think this informs part of what Paul brought me here for, is notionally, as you start making these changes and as you start really moving towards internet scale, things break really funny. It's like the law of complex systems. You're going to have emergent behaviors. Things are going to feel very different in those scenarios. That's a great question, Tyler.
Yeah, and then so the natural follow-on to that question is visibility and continuous observability of what's going on in that environment. And I think getting ourselves into a position where we're out I'll use the term outsourcing, but not really, but building into a system such as Heroku, let's put it that way, gives us the ability to have a single management plane maybe, or a single plane that allows us to view and continually understand the state of operations of our application infrastructure. And that is something that I think people need to strive for, both at a large enterprise level, at the developer level, but certainly at a large enterprise level across the board, like what is in your environment, right? So I'm definitely a fan of using these bigger, broader platforms to centralize on. So excited to see Heroku, and wonder, can you maybe comment on the visibility of what Heroku can provide and the management tier on it?
Absolutely. So first, I think it's important to underscore, you're completely right. Monitoring and observability are a cornerstone. In the public cloud, regardless of the tier you're operating on, if you do not have strong identity and strong observability, you are deaf, dumb, and blind. Like there's a tree's going to fall in the forest. You're not going to be aware. You're going to have nothing. And so having strong logging, strong telemetry, metering, observability has so many terms buried into it from different teams and different needs. I think it's real important to deconflict that, but yes. So what does Heroku have available off the gate? Salesforce and the rest of our developer experience, we're working on consolidating all of our offerings across the rest of the Salesforce developer community. I think Heroku brings some of our best of breed forward. So first and foremost, what you're looking for is the cleanest path to drain logs out. And that's part of what our private and shielded infrastructure, our single tenant infrastructure was designed to do, is to remove any of our infrastructure and give you direct drain so you can just forward all of your logs straight out to whatever observability platform you're looking for. So if you start plugging in APM or any other metrics engine to get telemetry and uptime and any visibility you can into the various performance aspects of your application, I think that's a critical path. I think some of our classical security controls where you're looking for span ports and that kind of stuff is going to create a lot of overhead. And I don't know that's always the right place to do it. But that's absolutely the right direction to go. And I would be starting with a visibility first. If I can make a kind of cultural reference, as we move towards DevOps, security is going to be best if we treat it as a defect category that we empower the engineers that own these services to run with. Something that's deep in our culture is this notion of a total ownership model, and there's a lot of interpretations around it. But as it turns out, Tyler, you and I are not going to be the people on keyboard troubleshooting and fixing the code in most of these enterprise environments. It's the team that owns that specific group of services in partnership with production engineering. And so the more we can give them the visibility, advanced notifications, something's not quite right, something's misbehaving, something's unstable. Back pressure and other things are really hard to detect as you scale, and you're going to learn. So creating that positive feedback loop, empowering those folks to see and learn about what's happening. It's a virtuous cycle. They're going to feel a lot more safe letting you know when something's wrong. Security doesn't have to be the leading edge for any of this detection.
It's a great lead into my next question. And how deep does Heroku go into telling me about vulnerabilities in my application? Could be a container, could be in my code. I know platforms vary, right? And then there's a million tools that can tell me all kinds of things about my application. But what does Heroku provide?
Right. So Heroku does have pipelines. And so part of our team offering is giving you that kind of CI/CD pipeline experience and giving you the ability to build a standardized pipeline with dev, test, and prod environments on our platform. All positive in terms of in-house integrations, whether you're going to go GitHub, GitLab, any of these others that are going to start giving you those additional hook points. Your source code management is going to be your responsibility. Your source code testing, whether that's code analysis and review, third-party plugin and library management, that stuff's all going to fall on your side of the responsibility. We're not a platform that's doing that, specifically because every enterprise has its own standards, its own code bases, its own tool selections. And while we may be a polyglot hosting platform, we're not a polyglot security solutions engine. And so it's going to be important for you to understand your environment and then make sure that you're instrumenting your pipeline for your organization. We have a number of things that are rudimentary to help people. It's that rising tide raises all ships kind of thing. Like for folks that don't have pipelines and don't have separate environments, we try to make all of that easy. But once you start moving towards enterprise accountability, you're going to need to build those hooks.
Yeah, I actually like that as a focus, because I think some of the other providers give you like just enough to kind of wet your beak kind of thing, but it's not an all-encompassing solution. So I kind of like, if I would go to my developers, look, you meant Heroku, but pointing out vulnerabilities in libraries and source code, we still need our own solutions to do that. And I like Heroku to be hyper focused on getting my app up there and in front of users as quickly and stable as possible.
I think that's an industry level challenge, and no disrespect to any of the analyst communities out there, but we don't want to be something to everybody. We won't be the best at absolutely anything if that's the case. I mean, case studies like Novell Border Manager firewalls, loved them, hated them. What you really, really want to do is do a handful of things really well. Like every other Heroku engineer, if I had a nickel for every time I was told, hey, I built my own Heroku, a lot of organizations are going to achieve real value at scale by building their own hosting platform. And Heroku is a term of art that was kind of the vanguard. Mm-hmm. But it's my position that we're looking for at least common denominator in a handful of offerings. What we want to be is really rich in our developer experience, really rich in our integration points that allows folks to pursue excellence in their specific areas, that allows companies to make really smart, informed decisions.
Adrian?
Yeah, so first off, the span port mention kind of cracked me up a little bit. I feel like span ports are like the headphone jacks of InfoSec, right? Yes. They're starting to disappear from devices.
Love the analogy.
and services. And some people are okay with it, and other people are unhappy about that. So I feel like it's a good analogy.
PCAPSR didn't happen, Adrian.
Right.
Yeah. Right. You don't necessarily need a span port, but that's probably a different conversation. So what I'm curious about is, as a PaaS service, what do you think the best way of educating your users in terms of security and just avoiding foot gun type situations is? Because it feels like, unless I've missed something, Heroku hasn't really had an equivalent to kind of the S3 disaster that Amazon had with just a wide range of companies having breaches that were entirely because they didn't configure S3 permissions correctly, or maybe they did it on purpose and just weren't thinking about what data they put in there. But certainly some of those were probably unintentionally, the ACLs were unintentionally public. But I remember the first time I logged into AWS and it was like, hey, this root user you have that has access to everything, you might not want to do that. So they actually pop up in the UI and tell you, like, I didn't have to go searching in documentation for that. They're like, you're doing something dumb. Okay. You probably need to change this. So, but I imagine that's kind of a, something you have to balance, doing some enforcement and some gentle guidance versus really good, concise documentation. So just curious about your thoughts on that.
That's a great question, Adrian. I think you raise a number of really important things. First and foremost, I don't think it should be the responsibility of our engineers that are software developers to understand the bounds of networking, to have to keep up with all of the different moving pieces and changes and features and API endpoints and new services and default configurations for AWS. It's shifting sand underneath. It's important to understand that as you're managing up and managing down, Heroku's kind of caught in the middle. And so any platform you're going to look at is trying to provide a stable development environment that handles a lot of the operations, manages down aggressively to take a lot of this off the table. And so when I say opinionated, there's a lot of freedom there, and I think it's really, really important. And for some developer populations, it's really, really frustrating. So old school draconian security, where we told people what they could and couldn't do, was probably sold very poorly. What we're doing for the Heroku customer base as Salesforce delivering this for our developer community, we provide an opinionated experience where you can't change S3 bucket permissions. You can't define where database backups are going. You can't change any of these IAM configurations. You're not interacting with any of it at all whatsoever. You're connected in. We're handling everything else for you. There's a handful of things you can turn on. We start with very publicly documented defaults that deals everything from security groups and VPC pairing and MTLS opportunities, access patterns and architecture patterns for application design and how we integrate things. And there's always room to raise visibility. But I think part of the magic of something like Heroku, so any platform you're going to see developed in-house or source elsewhere, what we're trying to do is remove the cognitive load, all the additional decisions and the fatigue that comes with trying to identify, to inventory, to educate. That's a lot of wasted energy. We believe that if developers can turn caffeine into code and code into revenue and value for mankind or for their company, we're best empowering them to narrow their focus and pursue excellence in their craft and take everything else we can off the table.
If it were always that easy to just convert caffeine into code, I would be the best coder in the world. I'm just saying.
I mean, I love the food analogy because it's me every time I go to any kind of like build your own thing, kind of fast casual restaurant, like our favorite poke bowl place or, Tex-Mex place where they're like, what do you want? Anytime they have something on the wall that's just like, here's a thing that's already built. You don't have to make any decisions. You just choose this thing, and like we'll put the 14 different ingredients in there in the right amounts. I'm like, yeah, that. But any given day, I have to make so many decisions. It's I feel like it's the same there. Especially if it's like an idea to URL type of thing. That's kind of a different use case from a monolithic production application. That we're going to plan and build. I would think you'd want a lot of that. Hey, let me just get this pre-built thing off the menu.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the framework, right? So taking Heroku as a use case, our infrastructure and our customer account surface area for AWS, I think, is roughly 700 AWS accounts, probably more by now. You think about the tens of thousands of IAM and additional configs that happen underneath. They're all based on a handful of profiles. It's fully automated. Our account management system is quorum-based control. No single person can take terribly too many actions. Every non-idempotent, every significant administrative change on a control plane requires a 2FA press. There's alerting and peer reviews that happen on absolutely every code change that affects our infrastructure. Do you really want to build that and get it perfectly right? Like, there's a lot you want to take off the table. There's a lot that you want to get there. No solution's perfect. But what we strive for is transparency. We're all on a security journey. And you want someone that's going to talk to you about what dog food they're eating, what mistakes they've made, and how they're learning and growing, and to gather that feedback. Again, I still believe the highest calling in our profession is to make those conversations safer.
Trey, we could absolutely continue this conversation, and we're just going to have you back. So I wanted to thank you for appearing on the show today. That was awesome. Great information about the Heroku platform and really the benefits, which I think is what I was lacking. Like, why? Why would I use that instead of something else? I think you really helped paint that picture very well. So thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
And with that, we will take a short break and come back with our next interview about getting into the SOC. Stay tuned.